All right, thank you all very much for attending. As you can tell from the panel title, we are going to be talking about sports and news, and specifically, who cares about sports and news? We've got a lot of information about different consumer segments, what their video preferences are, and so with our panel, we're going to do a deep dive into that, and also we're going to kick it off after the introductions with a few example slides analyzing a survey which did a deep dive on sports and news. So let's start off though with introductions. So Kaizar, would you please kick it off?
Sure. Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kaizar Campwala. I run business operations for ABC News, and I spend a lot of time focused on our fairly new 24/7 streaming service, ABC News Live, where I am looking at the entire business, from distribution to analytics, and really how we can improve what we do on a day-to-day basis, editorially and more.
I'm Tony Brown. I'm Chief of Staff for Newsy. Newsy's been around for about 10 years, started as a web streaming site. Got into OTT kind of early, and then most recently, in the last 2 or so years, we've launched a 24/7 cable channel. So we're kind of working backward from some of the traditional media brands that we're now kind of playing with.
I'm Rob Dillon. Until very recently, I was the digital operations manager for Tribune Broadcasting. 43 TV stations, a cable channel, a radio station, various forward-facing websites, covers.com, things like that. I was the technical guy in charge of everything but the CMS, so live streaming, OTT, connected home, school closings, things that have nothing to do with this or my interests, but anything like that, my team and I handled at Tribune. We're now a part of Nexstar Television, or actual Nexstar Digital, and we're still kind of feeling out our roles, so I can't really tell you what I do.
By the way, how's the audio out there? Can people hear okay? Good, excellent. And then I'm Jonathan Hurd. I'm a director with Altman, Vilandrie and Company. We're a strategy consulting firm focused on technology, media, and telecom. We have 150 people in Boston, New York, and San Francisco. One of the things we do every summer is a consumer video survey, self-funded, where we track consumer behavior. And this year, we did, in addition, a deep dive into sports and news, because that is so critical to the pay TV in particular experience, but in general, also for a number of consumers. So I have 5 slides from that. We're going to use those to kick off the presentation. By the way, if anyone would like a copy of these slides or other excerpts from the research, feel free to give me a business card. I see some people ready to snap photos. So we do this survey every summer, as I mentioned. This year, video focus on sports and news, but we get into a lot of detail around things like pay TV subscribership, viewership of sports and news, what sports people are fans of, what they participate in, how much they value certain leagues, teams, or players, and what's really driving that, and also the impact of betting, wide variety of topics. And one of the most important things to look at is, when we ask people who subscribe to pay TV, that's live pay TV, like a cable subscription or even a virtual MVPD, as they're called, subscription to something like Sling TV, why do you stay with that? Why do you keep subscribing and rather than just going to online video or on-demand video? And the top reason, far and away, is live news is important to me. 30% say strongly agree, and another 35% say agree. And sports has a 23% saying it's strongly agree, and another 26% say agree. And then you see other reasons like, I want to watch new TV episodes when they're first broadcast. That's actually 62% when you include all the agrees. That would be things like, The Masked Singer, or whatever it is, or if you have to see that Game of Thrones episode when it's first aired. But you can see the other reasons kind of fall off a bit. So sports and news, very important to the pay TV experience and like the anchor of the pay TV subscription. And then what's really interesting is the correlation of regular sports and news viewers to their pay TV adoption. So the dark blue here is traditional pay TV subscribers, and you can see of the 45% on the left that are regular sports and news viewers, 81% of them subscribe to a traditional TV service and another 10% to a virtual MVPD service. So it's 91% who are subscribing to pay TV. On the far right are the people that don't watch sports and news. It's 21% of the population, and that's only about half, 51% subscribe to a live pay TV service. So there's a very strong correlation between viewership of sports and news and pay TV subscription status. But it's not all age ranges that have the same level of interest. So when we ask how frequently do you watch sports, not surprisingly, big difference between men and women on regular sports viewership. So about 2/3 of men say they're regular sports viewers, and only about 41% of women say they're regular sports viewers. Looking across the age ranges, it's roughly the same across all age ranges, a little bit lower for 55 plus, but sports viewership is very correlated to income. So on the far right, you can see less than 25K annual income is the lowest, and then it creeps up across income levels to 150K plus, about 2/3 are regular sports viewers. Now contrast that with news. How frequently do you watch the news? Well, look at the big difference in age range. So 18 to 24-year-olds, much lower than 55 plus. 81% of people who are 55 plus say they're regular news viewers. And with income level, a little bit of correlation with income, but really not all that much. So we're getting some insight here into who is it that's watching sports and news. And one of the other things that we did in our survey was we put in a simulation capability. We do this a lot with our clients where we say, what's the value of programming? We do that by removing programming from different offers and seeing what the impact is on subscribership level. And in this case, we set up a simulator so that we could remove certain sports and news altogether to see what would happen. So on the right is the current state of the world with all programming included. So about 79% of households subscribe to pay TV. Another 10% subscribe to subscription video on demand services like Netflix, but not pay TV. And then about 11% of the population doesn't subscribe to either. So you could see with that as the base, if you start removing things, you exclude news, you get a bit of a drop. You exclude sports, you get a very significant drop. And if you remove sports and news together, that cuts it down to about 52% of households subscribing to pay TV. And then we also ran a simulation on the far right here. If sports and news were the only thing available live on pay TV, what does that look like? It's about 2/3 of households would still subscribe. So all that other live stuff, the live channels like, again, these events, Bachelorette, Bachelor, Masked Singer, whatever, they really have some impact, but it's sports and news that are really driving a lot of adoption. So with that as the introduction, I'm going to turn it over to the panel here and ask some questions of them. And one of the things that comes to mind is, given this very age-related behavior around news in particular, what have you found in terms of targeting consumers, having offers that either appeal to one age range or another? And just how do you think about this very age-related difference in news interest?
I'll take it. So Newsy was our most recent business premise, I guess, is that we're the news brand for the next generation. The idea being that we're really focusing on news consumers who are a little bit more, look a little bit more like me as far as age, but really in a particular life stage. They're usually in their late 30s or early 30s, may have 1 or 2 kids at home, may also be a little bit more centered in the middle of the country rather than on the coasts. And they have a job, they're steady income, but they're interested in news and they're actively consuming news on a regular basis. And there's 3 things that we know about these people that we've kind of like built our brand premise off of. One is they don't have a ton of time. With young kids at home or with a full-time job, you don't have a ton of time to sit around and watch news for hours. And that's something that our competitors in cable we're programming against. Another piece is that we find that the majority of when we ask our target viewers why they don't watch more television news, one is I don't have the time. Another is they don't have access to cable. The audience is extremely fragmented. So we try to be everywhere at once and try to make our product as as ubiquitous as possible, and that's why we've focused real intently on OTT and connected TV streaming. And the third is that they're super sensitive to the polarization of cable news, and that's the other big reason. The second biggest reason that we find people don't watch more television news is that it's too polarized. And we've seen that over the past few years, kind of the industry of cable news has become more and more polarized in terms of programming and content. And that's given us quite a bit of white space to move into. So, Newsy was recently just rated by there's the classic polarized news chart. And we were recently rated the least polarized, I guess, or least politically affiliated and most factually reliable news network. And for those reasons, I think that we're kind of centering in on what we're all talking about here today, as far as the audience and the audience opportunity that exists on streaming.
Kaizar, I've heard a similar thing about your ABC News being not wanting to be polarizing as well. Is that true? And how do you appeal to these different segments?
I think what's heartening is, well, a lot of our user data and basically echoes much of what you said. And we fundamentally looked at how the way people are getting news today has profoundly changed. The interest in certain kinds of news, though, hasn't. Key breaking news events, live events, we see that people want access to it, but we also know that cord cutting or never subscribing is a growing thing. And so when we looked out at the landscape, we were sort of like, okay, how does ABC News fit into this? And what we found, echoing some of what Tony was saying, is that people when there's breaking news happening, they want a way of connecting to it, and that spans age ranges. However, a younger demo, and it's not exactly only about age, but a younger demo is a little bit less interested in the talking heads. They just, from us, they want the live stream. They want an unintermediated, connection with what's happening. And, in terms of like who's consuming news, old people or young people, like this is what we find, because ABC News has a pretty significant, linear distribution. We know a lot about who's watching on TV today. We also know about who's engaging with us on social media. So it's like across the spectrum. And what we find is that, for our debate in September, there were a certain population of folks who were watching the linear streams, And a very different group of people, but a huge number of people were watching on Twitter, on YouTube, on the Roku channel, on Hulu Live. And echoing again what Tony was saying, like, our answer to this question is ubiquity and distribution, right? People will be consuming where they are, where they're comfortable, and it's sort of our job to make sure we're there for them.
So it sounds like there are some things that you could use the same feed essentially for impeachment hearings or something like that, but then in terms of how you adapt the news to different segments or viewing platforms, it sounds like you might keep the talking heads on traditional TV news, but then have a different format if it's distributed over Twitter or whatever.
I think that's right. And look, there are a whole bunch of choices we're making, from who our talent is to what sorts of live streams we're putting on, et cetera, that inform sort of the look and feel and consumer appeal.
Now, see, with us as traditional broadcasters, we already know that we skew older, we skew female, but that's not really who's watching our linear news, whether it's when we toss the network or if it's our local. They're watching us for local. It's people my age, a little older, that grew up with a completely different viewing habit. You got home from work, you sat down, you watched the 5:30 and the 6, and then you had dinner. And it still works that way. What has fascinated us is we found that age group and our demographic is also the first ones to complain if our live stream isn't working on the web, or if our OTT apps, which they do not have live streaming, and they're all VOD. They want the linear experience. They don't want to sit there and click to each story, which even in my mind, as an old fart, I sit here and think that, I'd much rather pick out the stories I want to watch. But our audience wants the linear experience, as you guys were talking about. And it doesn't matter if they're turning into CBS News and ABC News or our local news. They want it. They want their talking heads. They want it linear. And we've tried to learn how to tell our story differently for the different platforms. But then you run into the situation with either the news director or the station engineer who's 2 years from retiring because they've been in the business for 50 years that still don't understand the value of digital. They don't understand taking resources away from the broadcast product. And then you get the reporters themselves who are like, why did you cut my intro and outro? And it doesn't work to tell them because people your age want to watch it that way. They don't want to see you talking to the anchor. They don't want to see you repeat what the anchor said. They don't really care. And we've got the metrics, where the drop-offs are and all that, and they don't care. They just, you're ruining my reel. I don't have anything to put on my reel. And it's like, well, go back to the air check because it's still on that one. But so they get upset about learning the new ways of telling the story, which I'm sure you've ran into, and that's what you're getting away from because it doesn't work. So we struggle with that constantly, but.
So these internal barriers are a challenge going from linear to OTT with the same resources. You almost have to start fresh in some ways. And Tony, did you find organizational challenges in going from a traditional to now you have a curated linear feed, right? How did you handle that?
We're still handling it. It's I think it's a combination of breaking bad habits and also just finding ways to work through some of the very different workflows that exist. If you are digital first, you have a very different mindset about how you're going to go and produce your content than you would a traditional broadcast linear first. And so even the people that we hire from whether it's local news or national news or from a digital publication, we're finding that everyone has their own conceptions for how you would go about, or the best way to go about producing that content. And overseeing technology over the last couple of years, one of my biggest challenges has been figuring out how to marry the workflow that we use on our live production workflow with the stuff that's being created that's going straight to digital and digital first. And without spending the next 45 minutes talking about that, I would say that that's one of the biggest challenges that we've had as an organization in kind of bridging those two products.
While we're on the topic, Kaizar, what about internal challenges in serving both ends of the spectrum of the audience? What have you found there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting challenge in that you don't want to recreate sort of a cable network, right? Because though these are 24/7 streams, they also are distributed in very different ways. They're monetized in very different ways, and we sort of acquire and engage our audiences in very different ways. And so it's not like, yeah, we're not recreating a cable news network, but it is also not sort of VOD. Bridging that, these things are, when you're creating something new, whether it's in sort of a culture that has been doing something in the same way for a long time, or not, it's difficult. But what's great is just leadership alignment. I mean, it's not that hard, I guess.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
And speaking about consumer segments again, and Tony, you had mentioned to me that so some of this seems just like a cohort of a certain age. Like you get into the habit of liking talking heads, it stays with you through your life. And if you have a certain way of consuming on demand or through social media, whatever it is, that sort of stays through a cohort. But Tony, you were saying one interesting thing is that 18 to 24-year-olds kind of their lack of interest in news compared to older segments is probably more just the age range they're in as opposed to being in a behavioral cohort.
Yeah, I think it's one of my personal theories that I'd love to actually get into some of more of the research on. But I think about myself and how little I cared about local politics or even state politics or the local news until I started paying taxes or thinking about where I might want to buy a house so that I'd have a good place for kids to go to school. And I think that there is a certain life stage that you get into where news really starts to matter on a little bit more than a surface level to you. And that's one of the insights or beliefs that we've kind of like built our brand around is, we're okay with not chasing the 18 to 24-year-olds. Instead, we're going to shoot a little higher and know that we're going to try to reach, someone who's actively engaged in the news and wants to get a little deeper, and really try to ride that cohort as they grow older.
In the surveys we do, speaking of local news, regardless of age range, local news generally does finish slightly ahead of national news. For 55 plus, those are the top two content categories, even beating NFL, and then everything goes down from there. But how have you integrated local news into your offering? How do you do that successfully so that, when someone turns on the news, they get an appropriate mix? How does that work for you?
Well, it's easy for me because that's 100% what I am.
Yeah.
Unless there's a car chase in LA, nobody in the rest of my station group really cares about anything national. And to them, the car chase is national news. I don't understand that, and I'm not the one who turns into the car chases, but they're our biggest, highest ranked digital product is when there's a car chase in LA. We see the numbers, and just like you said, local is huge. It's what drives, and to an extent, it brings people to the national because they're turning in early, and then you're getting the rating points off of that as they're sitting there waiting to hear about the city council and the cop issues and things like that, which are, I find it a little bit odd because I grew up in rural America. And everything in rural America affected where we were. But I live in a rural town now, and people are still tuned in to the Indianapolis news. And I think it's more so they can laugh at the big city. I really do, because, okay, how many murders were there last night? How many car crashes? How many? Meanwhile, our fire siren hasn't even went off in 2 months.
So there's a lack of content, is what you're saying, for the
right. So there's two different reasons for tuning into it, and our OTT does skew younger, but it's still those things. Whether it's a viewer from our analytics, a viewer out here watching the Indianapolis news, and it really goes back to the old adage in local news: if it bleeds, it leads, and that's what people want to watch, even in our VOD and our OTT apps.
Kaizar, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have 230 plus affiliates, and we really lean into that when there are fires in California or tragic events anywhere across this country. We're really lucky to be able to lean on our local sort of boots on the ground that deliver these live streams that, nationally people, it's an emotional thing watching these live events and breaking news events. And even if it's not happening where you are, you get kind of glued to it. I mean, we see, we saw that with the hurricane coverage in August. People were watching that everywhere.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think we haven't really gone so far as to localize our own products, but the way that we work with local is just leaning on and trying to exchange resources. We don't have any expertise covering hurricanes, but we have four stations in Florida that do. And they're out there, with the umbrellas and everything and sending us pictures. So in that way, we find that we can raise the level of local stories and give them a loudspeaker. And at the same time, we have different resources that are available to us as a national brand that aren't available to local brands. So we just try to make sure that we're making the most of those resources.
Cool. Now, one other challenge for a typical OTT service is driving viewership, generating demand, making sure people come to view or even subscribe to your service. How do you go about, what have you found to be successful in generating demand for your services?
I think connecting with digital audiences, there is no silver bullet. You have to be executing across the board. Key pillars of how you connect with audiences. So search, right? So we make sure that we leverage our web properties to connect people to ABC News Live when it makes sense. We leverage our social reach across all of our brands to do the same. And then, on the distribution side, we spend a lot of time working with our distribution partners. We work very closely with them so that they effectively surface our content when it makes sense to their users.
Who are your major ones there?
We distribute with a whole bunch of folks, and each one of them shines at different times. We love working with Roku, for example, but we distribute with a lot of folks. We do one of the interesting things we see actually is Facebook. Speaking to sort of the brand safety issue, ABC News is also kind of considered a pretty safe brand in a time when almost all news brands are considered partisan and polarizing. And so having that brand, the safe brand identity in the news space is a real asset for us when we work with distribution partners, because for someone like Facebook, for example, there's a lot of value in using us for their election coverage.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think Facebook has been. I think they've seen the value of brands that don't have a political leaning, that are very brand safe, and we've definitely benefited in the same way. Roku, I agree, also some affiliate marketing there goes a long way because there's quite a bit of editorial control over where they move their audience. And so on OTT you have an opportunity to market content directly to viewers. You can go and buy ads that deep link it to content in your apps. That's one of the strategies that we use for introducing people to the brand. But there's tons of opportunity also. They're all looking for reasons to keep people on their platforms longer. They need the content as much as we need the viewers, and finding those symbiotic relationships is super fruitful.
Good.
Now with us, I think we've only paid for one ad one time, and that was right after we launched New York on the OTT service, because New York is the original Yule log, and they used to be known as the Christmas station in New York when they were independent. So we bought a bunch of, and we launched on December 1st, so we bought a bunch of ads, and it was our first channel. We bought a bunch of ads, not only saying here's the Yule log, but here's the old holiday specials, here's where you can go for this. And so we've got stations like New York. We've found, well, let's start by how do I get people there? Discovery, we all know, is notoriously difficult, but being a broadcaster, we have the loudest megaphone possible. And that's the same way our mobile and our phone apps have gotten so large, the way our Facebook pages have gotten so large. You have your anchor sit there going, if you want more on this, go to our app. Or on Facebook, we're asking this question. Or go friend us and we'll give money to the Humane Society, when they allowed that kind of stuff. But once they're into the app, to keep them coming back, we found going hyper-local. High school football, high school basketball, games of the week. One thing I've got one station experimenting with is long form. And what I mean by long form, you realize on a traditional television broadcast, a package is usually no longer than 1 minute and 30 seconds. A sweeps package, we all know what sweeps are, is normally 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Well, we've paid that reporter for 2 months of research and field work, and 98% of what they filmed, and a photographer, and 98% of what they filmed never gets used. So why can't we repackage that into a longer form? And then the anchor says after it airs, for more about this cause, whatever, sweeps pieces are very spectacularized. Go out to our OTT device. You can find it in your app store. We had to do that because everybody's trying to figure out how do we tell them to go to Roku, Amazon, Android, and Apple at the same. Go to your connected device store, download the app, and there you'll see Gene's story in it in full. That works really well. Like I said, the hyper local stuff that would never, ever show up on your guys' stuff. People care about, and they know they can go to the connected devices and see. Like I said, the local sports, local news, if the story's big enough, you guys are going to pick it up. But, you're not going to pick up a story about I hate to say that one because Ellen actually picked up, about the reporter on a Saturday morning saved a bunch of ducks from a drain. Ellen did pick that one up, so it was probably a bad example because once Ellen picked it up, everybody picked it up. But, little acts of kindness like that, which won't ever matter on your guys' scale, those play well. And those are the local news. And it's funny, I brought it up earlier, the murders, the fires, the local news has a very, very short shelf life. So a day out, those aren't even getting hits anymore. Whereas the duck being saved is getting hits months out. The high school game, if it's like the play of the week, that gets played out and it's still getting hit because grandparents will go watch it, and grandparents will call their card club up and say, go watch my grandson and go watch my granddaughter at the state sectional. So that stuff is what keeps people coming back to our OTT apps. And
so a good segue, we hadn't really talked about sports yet. The local sports being part of hyperlocal. It used to be that if you wanted to cover a news event or sports, you needed a local truck to broadcast it, and now we've got backpacks that you can use and have much lower cost and cover more news and sports events. How has new technology changed what you're able to do in terms of news gathering or covering local sports? Or
It depends on each station. They all have their own plan of attack, but I've got some stations who have the student journalists at the school do the entire game. And then it comes back into the station, whether that's over Live View or through Sling TV or whatever they're using, and then it gets edited for the sports report that night, and then turns around and gets put onto the OTT, the full game. We've also got our stations that will go out and just, where it used to be, all of our stations had helicopters. They'd take the helicopter, they'd land, they'd take 30 seconds of footage, take off again and fly. Now we can send a MMJ or even an intern out with a drone, as long as they're licensed. We're commercial, it's gotta be licensed, with a drone, and do the same thing we were doing, $1,500 an hour helicopters for, we do with one charge of a battery that gets charged up while they're going to the next school, so it's just the gas in the news van. So the technology is helping us cover, like I said, the things that matter to our audience the most. It helps us cover it easier and quicker, especially as the broadcast economics, very few stations have helicopters anymore. Ignore the fact that everyone in LA has a helicopter. You go to Indianapolis and it's like half the stations now have helicopters, and the other half are waiting for the leases to expire. So it makes things, when every penny counts now in the consolidation of local broadcasts, the technology that we can either use to live stream or to even put on broadcast or put on OTT, it's incredible.
how about for you?
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think the backpacks and things are amazing. I mean, we can put a team on a plane and they can be in Paris and broadcasting back to us. And with bonded cellular, we're doing it. We're never touching the internet. We're never touching satellite, and it's coming straight back to us. And we've got a beautiful 1080p, 1080i 60 signal. But it also gives that team tons of flexibility. They're not traveling with road cases. They don't have to worry about all the equipment and the logistics behind that equipment. It's more logistics behind actually getting the story or being in the right place. And being in the right place doesn't mean line of sight at that moment. It means where the story is. And so I think that it just allows your teams to focus a lot more on the story and way less about all of the pre-planning that goes into what used to be a live shot.
Cool.
Yeah, you're in the
I
moment.
agree.
Yeah, you're actually in the moment and worrying about what you're covering rather than, am I set up correctly? Is this getting back to the station? Is it?
Cool. Any questions from the audience at this point? Yes. I don't know if there's a microphone or not, but actually shout it out and I'll repeat it. No, you don't. Is there unbundling happening in the cable side where people are, I guess, watching news and sports, but not other things or that type of thing? Is that?
That's the cord cutting promise, right? Like you cut the cord and you can pick the slices that you want. Like, is that really happening already, or how far along is it?
You want to answer that? Is there any trend toward picking the channels you want? I mean, I'll just say it's very difficult for that to happen today because of the way programmers bundle their content and it gets distributed. There are skinnier packages available that are a bit skinnier, a bit cheaper, some of the virtual MVPDs. But for the most part, if you want live sports news, you're going to get a lot of other stuff with it too. So the slides I was showing earlier are very hypothetical in terms of what would happen if such offers were available. Any different perspectives or?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, right here.
If Trump gets impeached and then he has a trial in the Senate and he wants to testify, will the internet crash, or will the news get Super Bowl ratings for that situation if he actually wants to testify live, which Nixon didn't do?
I guess I'll paraphrase the question. If there were a big event like Trump testifying, could internet delivery handle something like that?
Yeah, I think, I can remember back, and you can correct the years on it, but the Boston bombing, which was huge, and all of my stations wanted to cover it, and my CDN melted down. I think we've came a long way since then. I think something like this, as much as me being a politics geek, and just based on that question, I'm assuming you are too, we think everybody thinks like that. I've got, at least for every friend like me, I've got 10 that don't care. So there would still be high viewership. I don't think it would ever hit Super Bowl levels. It's definitely would never hit Disney Plus levels. I think the infrastructure is there now. Plus it would be pulled out of the Senate. So once it get to the first mile out of the way, and then that's where all the congestion would be, but it'd be pulled. So it'd be a lot more strategic kind of architecture.
I think because that traffic would be so distributed across all the networks, it's not going to be as huge. But I think in aggregate you might get close to Super Bowl numbers, but
it wouldn't be everybody going to Amazon.
There wouldn't be
Prime.
exclusivity.
It would be going to KTLA and going to WPIX, which has got its own last mile.
I think AWS would get a lot of phone calls in the week before, just to make sure that everything's going to be set, but I think we'd be able to handle it.
Yeah, but just to echo that, I mean, it is very impressive what these CDNs are capable of today.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't think things would melt down. At least the streams wouldn't melt down, or something might melt down.
There would probably be some independent meltdowns.
Yeah.
Like if they were on a cut rate CDN and trying to feed it out of themselves once they got it down from the network.
Yeah.
But as for the general infrastructure of the United States, I think we'd be okay.
Great. Well, it's time for happy hour, so we're out of time. We don't want to hold you back there. But please join me in thanking our panelists.